Welcome to Out of the Blue, number 388. So, I have a thing called the map of the emerging paradigm. And the emerging paradigm is different, and it's different in a number of ways, and really too many to talk about all at once. So I'm just going to start on one, which is a continuation of episode 387. Because in episode 387, I was talking about Malcolm X. And Malcolm X went from being a petty criminal, drug dealer, prison inmate, and while in prison he put his nose in a dictionary, and he acquainted himself with words. And through his life journey, he put the violence behind him. And he became, later in life, so he became a Sunni Muslim, and he took a trip to Mecca. And so what I'm getting at is that within the new paradigm, becoming a Muslim is a movement towards peace. Because in the current paradigm, there's this prejudice of Islamic terrorists. So the Muslim faith is in the current paradigm intertwined with this idea of the Islamic terrorist. And in the emerging paradigm, which is here in my world where I am, if somebody becomes a Muslim, if somebody is Islamic or converts to Islam, in my way of thinking, within the Neo-Swedenborgianistic worldview, that is a movement towards peace and peacefulness. And because the example we're looking at is Malcolm X, who for a time in his life advocated violence, and for a time in his life advocated separation based on complexion, skin color. And then this was all part of a journey, and it was part of a journey of, as I said in the last episode, following your heart wherever it leads you. So he followed his heart where it led him, and he gave up those ways of thinking, and he became well, first of all, he put himself at great risk by doing this, because in great risk and real risk, which came to fruition. I mean, he was murdered. He was shot by more than one person at the same time. And so he put himself in real danger to get this message out. And I sometimes think it's a shame that the messages that he presented earlier in his life, advocating violence, are associated with him, when in fact, later in life, he forsook violence. And so, within the new paradigm, the map, have I mentioned the map of the emerging paradigm? There's a map of the emerging paradigm. And within the new paradigm, Islam is good, essentially. And there's this phrase, so Neo-Swedenborgianism is a product of me in college, and what I went to college for was comparative religion. And so there's a phrase in comparative religion called people of the book. And people of the book essentially is, within an academic setting, talks about the Abrahamic religions. So the religions that trace themselves back to Abraham. And in general, it's mentioned, it's thought to be the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. But for me, and not just for me, I mean for a lot of other people, it includes Rasta. Because within Rasta, they're also part of the Abrahamic tradition. So for some reason, they're not really accepted as such, but that's kind of a prejudice in itself, because within the Neo-Swedenborgianistic worldview, we are all people of the book, which is to say Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Rasta. We are all people of the book. We all share this worldview, this larger worldview, and we share our fate. It's almost like we're all in this together. And so it behooves us. It is in our own best interest that we all learn how to get along. And as an example for learning how to get along, I'm presenting Malcolm X, because he came to a realization that is useful to all of us. So I highly recommend listening to him speak. There's a whole bunch of videos online if you just do a search for Malcolm X speaking, because he was extremely articulate and he had a lot of very interesting things to say, and you can follow the course of his whole life right to the very end. So he is an inspiration to us, Neo-Swedenborgians. And as I've also said in a previous episode, that where I see this heading, the people of the book, there's an aspect of prophecy in what I'm doing. And the aspect of prophecy is basically that there's some people within the people of the book who have gotten to the end of the book before everybody else. And those are Rasta people. Rasta people believe that Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, is Christ, or was Christ returned. And so for Christians, there's this promise of Christ returning. Well, for Rasta people, that promise has been fulfilled. And my prophecy is that in the Hebrew year 6000, we as a worldwide civilization are going to come to this realization together. We're all going to agree. We're all essentially going to become Rasta brothers and sisters. And this is not going to happen anytime soon, but 225 years from now. But then again, if you look, 225 years is not really all that long. For example, this violin, like I had a different violin. There are violins being played today that are 225 years old. That's not even terribly old for a violin. I mean, it's old, but it doesn't break any records, right? Because Stradivarius was making violins in 1600, and they're still around. So 225 years ago from now is like 1790, right? And I've played violins I had a violin from 1790. It's not a rare thing. And so 225 years from now, our ancestors will enter 1,000 years of peace. Now, since I'm on the subject, how much time do I have? Since I'm rambling, and this is going to be a talky one, the next one's going to be a fiddly one. There's some opposition to this idea that Haile Selassie is Christ returned, and one piece of opposition, one thing that somebody might say is that he never performed any miracles. Haile Selassie didn't perform any miracles. But then again, Haile Selassie was just a human. He was a man. He was a person. He was not a virgin birth like Jesus. Jesus was a Virgin Mary gave birth to Jesus, and Jesus performed these miracles. So Haile Selassie was just a man, and he was the last emperor on the throne of Solomon. He was the emperor of Ethiopia, and the throne ended with him. He was the final emperor. So he had his ups and downs. His life was not, he was born a prince destined for the throne. He took the throne, and then later the throne was taken from him. He certainly didn't have it easy. And so it's this idea of the Son of God being born as just a person and being stuck in this situation, somewhat powerless like all of us. And it's a really beautiful, profound idea. And even if you look at the people who are trying to create as accurate as possible a portrait of what Jesus might have looked like, and then you look at Haile Selassie, what he looked like, it looks the same. And so so we here on Out of the Blue, we talk about religion a lot, and it's a-okay with us, because there's also a kind of a prejudice against even talking about religion. So once you bring up the subject of anything religious, if you don't preface it by saying it's BS, there's a certain population who just won't listen. You have to say religion is BS, and that's not what I'm saying. Religion is a subject worthy of inquiry, deep inquiry. And if somebody becomes religious, that's good. And if somebody follows their heart, that's really the essence of what we're talking about. Following your heart wherever it leads you, And it led Malcolm X to becoming a Sunni Muslim, and to forsaking his violent, divisive words of the past. And so if somebody becomes a Muslim, that is good in our eyes, and speaking Neo-Swedenborgianistically, as long as they're following their heart, right? And so the idea is to follow your heart wherever it leads you. Even Jesus, if you look at Jesus in the garden when he was, on his way to Jerusalem, in the garden he asks, if I don't have to drink of this cup, but he still followed his heart, and it led him to change the world, essentially. And Malcolm X followed his heart, and it led him to change the world. And so there's also a very personal aspect with this, which is, this is about you and me following our hearts wherever it leads us, So, speaking Neo-Swedenborgianistically, it's not only a good idea, it's really just the only way to live. And so